First of all, good morning to all. Thank you for joining us. This is a regular deep dive that we do into the world of marketing, and I'm very excited today to be focusing on the world of brand partnerships. For those that are new to Pimento, a huge welcome. My name is Stephen Knight. I'm the CEO and founder of Pimento. Pimento is a full-service marketing agency with a network of over 175 independent agencies and consultancies that offer more than 97 different marketing disciplines to brands both here in the UK and around the world. Recording today's session, I hope that's okay. So please turn on your camera, smile throughout, and remember to use the chat box to ask any questions of our panel. As always, we want to make the session as interactive as possible. As I say, it's all about partnerships today. And as we all know, the strongest brands don't succeed alone. They build genuine collaborations that help to expand their reach, engage communities, and leave a lasting impact. And in today's discussion, we'll hopefully unearth how strategic partnerships and sponsorships can take brands to the next level. We've gathered four leaders at the forefront of this thinking. We've got Sally Hancock, who's Managing Director of High Tide Leap. Sally is an award-winning brand and sports partnership expert. She specializes in creating the right strategies, identifying and designing the right partnerships, and putting in place robust, inclusive and measurable plans to bring them to life. She's also proud to be non-exec director of the British Paralympic Association. Evie Brongenberg is Director of International Business Development at Chapter C. Evie is a multilingual sports and entertainment partnerships expert with experiences at the Walt Disney Company, Warner Brothers, Williams Formula One, Puma, where she led international sports marketing and licensing. She's also a lecturer in sports business and since 2021 has been a freelance consultant for sports, FMCG and entertainment clients. Colin Banks is Director of Material. He's a seasoned, as he describes himself, a partnerships expert with over 25 years experience across sport and music, working with major brands, rights holders and agencies, specializing in the power of partnerships to positively engage audiences and fans. And finally, Susie Moore is founder of Brand Rock, a marketing leader with deep expertise in brand partnerships, strategic collaborations. She has a proven track record of forging impactful alliances and driving brand growth and engagement. And she's also the former head of brand at O2, where she played a pivotal role in securing the naming rights and the launch of the iconic O2 Arena in London. And more recently, she served as the EVP of Global Brand at Sage, where she helped create their sports partnership strategy. So we have an august panel of experts from a range of different spaces with a significant amount of experience, hopefully to get into the whys and wherefores of this world. Lots changing, obviously, in the world of sponsorships, particularly, obviously, in the development of TV rights and, in particular, digital rights around the world. There's now a much broader range of opportunities within sport in general and entertainment than there were, say, 5 years ago. So you as brand owners, and it's great to have so many brand owners on today's call, should be, I guess, looking into this particular channel and finding ways in which you can actually broaden your brand reach and engage with your audiences and fans if you have them. I'm going to start, if I may, with Evie and ask you a question relating to how one defines a successful brand partnership, given obviously the changing world that we all live in. Evie.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for letting me be part of this. First of all, when we talk about brand partnerships, I always question my clients, what do you mean by a brand partnership? Is it a long-term partnership where you really want to build a relationship and it has many tentacles, or is it a short-term collaboration? Are we talking about an individual that you're looking for as an ambassador or an influencer, etc.? So that's already starts. What do you mean by a brand partnership? Once we get to that point, it's then a case of, right, what is the fit to your brand or your objective? It doesn't always need to be a brand fit. It can also be a fit to your objective. What is your rationale? Why are you spending this money? Why are you even entering this space? The simple why. And this is where then the fog starts lifting and you can get to more details and more insights from the one side of the partnership or the relationship, and find out what is it you're after, what is it you want to achieve, whether it's which generations do you want to address, Is it market share? Is it brand fit? Is it relevance? Is it pure revenue? So all these questions, it's almost like a long menu of questions that need to be addressed and answered, and answered in detail before I would suggest and even recommend then reaching out to suitable partners on the other side, whether that is an individual, whether that's an athlete, whether that's a musician, an artist, or whatever. That would always be my recommendation, to have a fulfilling and meaningful brand partnership, to start with the why and the what.
That makes a lot of sense, Evie. I mean, so obviously, as you say, starting point is to kind of define why, and then to think about basically the sorts of brands that you could possibly engage with. Colin, if I can come to you, I mean, it's a myriad of opportunities out there. I mean, we always talk about the number of independent agencies in the UK being nearly 30,000. If it comes to sponsorships and partnerships, there's obviously many more than that. And where does one start? I mean, what would be the starting point of actually identifying the right partners?
Well, morning everybody, and again, thanks for having me. I think Evie mentioned there is being absolutely focused on why you're doing it, because what happens is there's so much choice that you get to the situation that says, you get to that position where if you don't know why you're doing it, you're going to look at everything. And there's thousands of people who want to talk to you. There's loads of people who want to be brand partners with you for various reasons. So ultimately is doing that work up front and making sure the absolute reason and purpose and why you're doing it is as drilled down as you can. That then brings the option of thousands down to maybe the option of hundreds. So it's understanding exactly the reason why you're doing it. And that's what you would do with any other business challenge. So why should it be different with what you're doing with a partnership? Secondly, is you then start to look at who you would choose. So who could help you deliver the reason? So if you're doing it for whatever reason that you want to get involved, you then look for similar-minded people and organizations that can then fit. I mean, I talk about the why and the fit. So if you know why you're doing it, you then look for people that fit that objective. And that's probably the best place to start. Because ultimately, if you're doing it for the right reasons, the rest of it's a value exchange, it's a negotiation, it's an expansion of what's available. But if you do it for the wrong reasons at the beginning, Stephen, then that leads to a whole load of trouble. So, and sometimes people jump ahead, they see a good deal, or they see something that's just value, or that's sexy, or it's cool, or that's in at the moment. But ultimately, it's not meeting their business objective. So if you don't know what your business objective is, or if you're matching values, if you don't know what your own values are, then you're starting off with the wrong foundation that will crumble.
Well, that makes sense. Sally, what's the biggest mistake do you think that brands make when entering into partnerships? How can you avoid those?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think it's the mistakes that we often see is kind of an obvious understanding of the passion and interest of this target audience right up front is absolutely essential. We absolutely need to know what their passions are, what they like, what they aspire to, and the potential for this to grow the audience for that brand even further, I would say. And I would also say that a shared ambition between both sides, whether it's the brand and the audiences, to collectively add value to the event, to the activity, to the sport. I mean, good brand partnerships can really help to amplify and grow those. And I think that's one of the real sort of really useful and valuable assets of marketing in this way.
But I mean, your point there is that it's like any relationship, with business relationship or even personal relationship. Ultimately, there has to be a common meeting of minds. There has to be an opportunity for a value exchange. There has to be the opportunity that actually you can grow an authentic relationship. If we think a little bit about that further, if I can bring you into the conversation, please, Susie, what about authenticity in partnerships? How can brands ensure that these collaborations feel genuine and not forced?
Nighty, I think the word you just used is relationship. And the thing I think is interesting with partnerships as part of the marketing mix, it's the one area for me across everything I've worked on where it's the human relationship, the people either side that make or break the partnership. So just going back one step, I think to me, it's understanding three things. It's understanding your own brand, and you use the word authenticity. So you've got to be authentic to your brand because, well, if you're not, customers, stakeholders, everyone will recognize that and find you out, and you need to be true to your brand to be successful. The second is, most really importantly, understanding your customers and what they're going to connect with, because obviously partnerships are two-way and they are a relationship. So the customers that relate to your brand and you want to relate to your brand and give loyalty and build on that needs to be able to relate to the other brand. So those joint values and joint vision and going in the same direction are key. And the third thing is really understanding your partner and what your partner wants. And that is the relationship bit. And I think that when it doesn't work, it's because there are not, the objectives aren't aligned or your values aren't aligned and there's a disconnect. And taking the time, once you know the nuts and bolts of your objectives, and as Sally has said, and coming back to business objectives and strategy, and you're clear on the what, the how you do it, I would say, is the third point. The why being, we've talked about the why, the what you're doing will be, you'll find should be, I'd say the relatively easy bit, but the how is absolutely fundamental. And it's spending the time with that partner to build something together. And the relationship, how good that is, will make or break the partnership, in my opinion, and depend on whether it's a long-term partnership or just a short-term.
I suppose we need to define, I guess, the difference. Well, we need to define the differences between, I guess, long-term strategic partnerships versus short-term promotional partnerships and stuff that sits between the two of those. Does anybody want to kind of describe the landscape for me? That's anyone, by the way.
Well, I'll jump in because I've worked across sort of like the whole horizon of short-term and long-term. So particularly if we start going into sponsorships or sports marketing and you do a long-term, very often, and it also involves product marketing, etc., you tend to enter into at least a 3, 4, 5, if not longer relationship. And this is where I totally agree with Susie. The relationship actually needs to be a partnership, and very, very crucial to that partnership is that from day one, you understand each other's objectives because they're not always aligned. If it's a short-term collaboration, which is, people think that this is something of the last few years, but it's actually, if you think back about it, in 2004, Karl Lagerfeld did his first collaboration with H&M, which at the time was revolutionary because H&M was partnering with somebody who was the chief designer, creative designer of Chanel. So it's just because of the digital space that this has become more in the forefront. But I would say a short-term, I always call that a collaboration. It's a short-term collaboration. Very often it's about storytelling. It's about a marketing campaign that is in and out, or it's about on top of it, or selling a capsule range. But again, it's about alluring probably a new target audience to your group, to your brand, to your product, etc. So the objectives behind a long-term strategy are very, very different to a short-term collaboration. And the other thing is, it's obviously different if you are teaming up or partnering with an individual, because that individual has a personality. They are maybe not always predictable because they have that personality, versus if you team up with a brand or a cartoon or a team or a club, whatever. They all have personality and they stand for values. But if you are really looking for ambassadorship or an influencer, or tying up with an individual, that obviously comes with a certain risk factor. So in terms of when you come down to the why, the how, the what, I think you also, as the brand who's investing in this partnership, in this relationship versus receiving, you should also do an internal review on opportunity cost, because if you spend your money here, obviously you can't spend it somewhere else anymore. And also the risk factor, because certain partnerships come at a higher risk than other partnerships.
Okay, so sound advice. So as you rightly say, this is a relationship, and in the absence of having a kind of Tinder of brands, which although there's an interesting business opportunity there for any of you, you have to make a decision based upon your understanding of their brand, and obviously do your due diligence and do your research, and maybe sometimes actually doing a short-term promotional sponsorship or a smaller piece of activity can be quite a good way to actually establish whether there is a longer term relationship. You know, a bit of dating, bit of opportunity to basically get to know someone better and the brand better before you necessarily commit yourself to a multi-year deal. That's not always possible, however. You know, sometimes that you may be in a situation where you're bidding, or you're one of a number of people that wants to, you know, get into bed, as it were, with this brand and wants to work with this particular brand, and therefore sometimes, you know, you have to, with say FIFA, for example, you're looking at a European Cup or a World Cup or an Olympic sponsorship of that nature. You know, it's a much more complicated, deeper rooted and far more expensive sort of relationship to tying up with a local football club, or, as you say, working with an influencer. So assuming that we all agree this is a crowded sponsorship space and that things are complicated, that's assuming you've gone through that due diligence. You've made a decision, you've got alignment as to the sort of brands that you want to work with, you understand the sorts of value exchange, you've reached out to a dozen or more opportunities, and you've basically decided to back one or possibly two, and now you've got into the relationship. How can you create that standout? How can you make sure that when it comes to the activation side, which, let's be honest about it, a lot of businesses will go into a brand partnership and actually think that's it, job done. But actually they forget that actually you have to activate the relationship. You have to invest in the relationship to make it happen. What are the key components, and what do you go through in thinking about actually activation? What are the things that you have to consider about how you can make your brand stand out? This one, I guess, start with Colin.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. It's absolutely essential. I mean, I talk about it. It's like it's getting to the £1 million poker table. You've paid your money to get there, but you still need to play the chips. So that's one of the biggest mistakes a lot of partnership brands make, is they spend all their money or their investment getting the partnership up and running, but actually they've got nothing left to work it to make it happen for them. I think so. There's probably an element within that is to make sure exactly what you want to do and be very focused on it. But secondly, is make sure it's relevant. I think relevance is the biggest driver for me. Is you are talking to an audience, the same as anything else you're doing as a brand. Make sure you're true to yourself, make sure you're relevant, and working with your partner to talk about things that are interesting and engaging with the audience you're reaching. Because if you start trying to brand it, if you start trying to kind of, you know, put ads in places, I've seen, you know, people at music festivals that suddenly, you know, want to sell you something that's got no relevance to the audience that they're engaging with. It's back to how do you integrate with the partnership you have and make sure it's relevant. Otherwise, the end audience will just switch off. Now, that could be a reason why you're involved. Back to Sally's point of adding value, that you, because of my involvement as a brand, this is going to be better, or there's more value for you, or there's a relevance. If it's not relevant, then people just switch off immediately, and you're literally wasting your money of that investment. If you can't make it relevant, because people want to sit and go, oh yeah, I get why they're involved. And certainly previously working with an energy company involved, people would turn around and go, why is an energy company wanting to work in music? For example, you then start looking at, well, I want to reward you as a customer. I want to give you benefits. I want to bring value to you. I want to add to what we're doing with the venue from a, you know, whether that's from a net zero perspective. People suddenly then go, okay, I get it now. So if you do something that's just is because it looks good, but it's not relevant, the audience will switch off straight away, and it's very, very hard then to get them back, because you just think you're just putting your money in to buy them.
So, I mean, this one, I guess, is probably more directed at Susie or Ivy, or I mean, or anyone for that matter. My view is that the one thing that really needs to be really apparent, as you rightly say, is the relevance of the relationship. Now, sometimes, obviously, creativity can kind of bridge that gap, and what looks to be two brands that you wouldn't ordinarily expect to be working together suddenly becomes very interesting. I always remember the one for me, which I always get, you know, excited by, was the tie up with Guinness and Marmite a few years ago, and I just took kind of, you know, a really interesting collaboration and to try and get some on-shelf presence and create a product that was a little bit more distinctive and a bit different. And actually it did create, I don't know how sales success was like, but it did create a talking point. Can you give me some examples of situations where creativity has bridged that gap and how it's worked for the brands that you've advised in the past? Again, anyone
That's
on
me,
this?
90.
Yeah, could crack away, yeah.
Yeah, I think one thing I was going to say earlier actually is you talk about, you know, aligning with like-minded brands, and sometimes the partnerships can be quite obvious, but actually I think some of the really good partnerships are not obvious. And I think one of the things is to be bold. So be open to collaborations and partnerships that may be surprising, because they are the ones that, as you've said, create talkability. And there's one I came across when I was thinking about this. Greggs and Primark, I think, is a good example of. But they're different categories, but they work, and you get Greggs and Primark. But then I read that Greggs had partnered with Fenwick. Now I don't know how many of you have heard of this, but I literally just came across it and I hadn't heard of it, and I was like, and I was surprised. But they're now doing it for a second time, so I assume it worked. So you think high end, you know, Fenwick, it was in the champagne bar, and Greggs, very different demographic. But I think because of that, it worked really well. And I actually then sort of dug into it, and I've got to find some of the menu. I thought it was brilliant. So Greggs and Prime. So I should go back. Their authenticity was at the heart of it. So they're two brands from Newcastle. Fenwick started in Newcastle, so there was this connection, authentic connection of why they did it. So the why was there. And then the fact, obviously, food and drink, the champagne bar. But the menu was meals available. I think I said the Greggs steak bake served with a creamy peppercorn aioli, the sausage, bean and cheese melt paired with Bloody Mary ketchup, and a sausage roll that comes alongside a hot honey chili sauce. And I thought, who wouldn't want to drink champagne with any of those things? You know, it's just, that to me is maybe a short-term collaboration. I don't know, but it just made me smile, and it's fun. So I think actually should be open to really unusual partnerships and connections. The other one that I thought I was reading about was NASA and Prada. I thought was just brilliant. Prada doing the spacesuits for NASA. Because I think the point was, one, you know, not many people, like there's a few people going to be wearing these spacesuits, but the fact that it's been talked about and they are going to be the best engineered but most beautiful stylish spacesuits, I just thought was absolutely genius. But on a coming back to maybe more of the long-term partnerships, and if I can just, the other point, this is the previous point. The O2, people, you know, the O2 is held up now as, you know, as won awards and successful. And at the time, it was a big leap of faith. But actually, the thing about the O2 that really cut through and made it success was priority. It was the proposition. So coming back, and everything that Colin was saying about investing in the activation, that was the thing that made the O2. The O2 had its name above the venue, but the venue gave the opportunity for O2 to fulfill its strategy, which was basically to drive loyalty. It moved on from like Arsenal and a football team because the awareness job was kind of done, but it needs to drive differentiation and loyalty. And at that time, nobody else in the mobile phone market was offering anything that could better that. So we always said, if you have all the mobile phone companies lined up, they're all the same, a bit like energy companies, very similar, parallel to the energy companies. What makes you choose one? And it's, as a customer, what gives you that better experience, network and phone enabled, and that's where priority ticketing and entertainment and customers' passion points come from. So very, very different ends of the spectrum, but I think always thinking about the end result, what is the benefit and value and joy it's going to give to a customer, that's what's going to make it a success.
Does anyone have any other examples of what looked odd to begin with, then became just, why not? You know, it kind of gets into the public domain and gets into people's understanding of those brands and how they behave and perform, and therefore becomes a norm over time.
I won't go into examples, but what I would like to add to what Susie and Colin said is, and it goes back to where we started off. If we talk about activation, it goes all the way back to, why are you doing this? What are you ultimately trying to achieve? And that then leads into the rights that you secure. And I've come across it so many times that if that's not clear, once the ink is dry on the agreement, the actual partner who needs to activate assumes they have rights that actually they haven't secured in the agreement. That can go down to the social media handles that you can use, the amount of social media posts. All that needs to be put nowadays into a contract. The particular rights that you have to the intellectual property, you don't always automatically get the entire portfolio of intellectual property. So, and the other part of that is also, if you're looking into activation, to activate, you need the resources, and resources, it's the time, it's the budget, but also the capabilities. Do you have the right people in your team to activate that, what you've just paid for and what you've just signed up for? So preparation and really being clear what it is you ultimately want to get out of a short-term collaboration or a long-term partnership is absolutely key to the success factor. And it's also asking transparent question, making, if you're not sure whether you have the rights, ask that question at the right time, not once the ink is dry on the contract, because that's when it tends to be too late.
Yeah, and this is also classic when perhaps someone elsewhere in the business, sales director, chief executive, managing director, chairperson, makes a decision on a pet project, and then suddenly the poor marketing team has to make sense of it. And I'm sure that never happens, but were that to happen, it's a really tough gig, isn't it? Because you've then got, I'm basically, I've just done a deal with, here's an old brand, Brillo Pad, and I'm a personal care brand. It's going to be a tricky relationship. So, I mean, how do you deal with that situation and try and make sense of it? I mean, sometimes the creative gap can be so wide that it's just almost impossible to make the collaboration work. Again, anyone?
That is true, but I think, again, it comes into whether it's internally or externally, and it goes back to having a good relationship and a good partnership. If you can openly ask those questions and plow through those questions and get answers, I think that already then illustrates how good and solid the partnership is, because you can be honest and transparent and mutually trustful and respectful. And that's the same as internal. The marketing department or the product developers need to be able to raise their hand and say, listen, if we're going into this partnership, what is the internal expectation? What do we do with it? Again, also the opportunity cost, because if I do this, I can't do that, whether that is budget or time, etc. So it takes up resources. It's having the confidence to ask the relevant questions, I think, is absolutely key to an internal and external success. The other thing about activation is also sometimes it's easier to concentrate, or better to concentrate on and being focused versus applying the sprinkling can model, as I call it. Depends on what kind of brand you have, again, how many resources you have available. But again, omni-channel is everything versus maybe sole channel. If I can take a good example, if you look, for example, at the collaboration Adidas did with Gucci, that was a superb omni-channel strategy. So they did it from product to marketing to retail, i.e. point of sale, to then social media, etc. So and also the story. Whereas at the start, everyone was like, "Oh, Adidas and Gucci, those brands don't fit. One is premium and the other one is mid-market." But it did work because the execution was so good. But the execution was so good because when they started off, they knew what they wanted to achieve, what rights they wanted, and how they actually wanted to execute and activate that partnership. So it's almost thinking 2 steps ahead. And not wait until the ink is dry on the agreement, then going, oh, now we have these rights. What are we going to do with it?
Yeah. So then that comes back to
that.
Sorry, please, Con.
I can just add to that one, Stephen. Your challenge of effectively you've been landed with a situation is, my only bit of advice on that is just use it for whatever the reason it was bought for. Don't try and turn it into something it's not. So if a partnership, I mean, this is part of everybody. everybody's had that situation within partnerships or sponsorships. And back to that, you know, if it's not going to do something across the whole of your business, don't try and force it to do it. Just buy it for the reason, or make the most of the biggest benefit it has, and don't try and spend money or invest more trying to make it work. Develop your portfolio, look at something else that does that job for you, and just work it for what it can do. Rather, I've seen too many people that try and just kind of go, well, we've got this now, let's try and do everything with it. Sponsorship's part of your overall marketing project, so don't, it can't, sometimes you just can't do things, so don't force it. Just do the simple thing with it.
That's really good advice. And Sally, if I could come to you, and having worked with you on a few sponsorships over the years, the one thing that hadn't really appreciated as a marketeer, and by very nature as a CMO, you have to be a generalist, but the internal negotiation that has to happen within an organization to get alignment on objectives, and understanding actually how you can then prosper with that opportunity and make it work. I mean, I'm thinking here of a large energy company that Colin was referring to earlier on, and the work you did in women's football, actually trying to get everybody aligned internally when the idea emanated from your good self in relationship with corporate affairs, and it was outside of marketing. And then suddenly, obviously, you needed to bring marketing along. You needed to bring other aspects of the business along to recognize what the opportunity was. So that a huge amount of work has to happen internally in actually getting alignment. And how do you start with that? I mean, what's the sort of, you know, your rules, if you like?
Yeah, gosh, that's a really good question. I mean, I think, you know, being very clear from the very outset of the actual purpose of your partnership. What is it designed to do? You know, what are our expectations against it? What is our reach? How are we going to make that, you know, the very best that it can be? And, you know, in terms of internal approval and engagement, you know, being able to actively demonstrate the return on investment, the potential of the market, the scale of reach of that particular event or sport or activity. It's an active demonstration of the brand, you know, bringing the brand to life in you know, across a number of different platforms all the while. And internal engagement is a vital importance to that. And bringing the board along with you, absolutely being really very clear of the length of the partnership and how you're going to make that work over the term, for example. Many brands sign up for long contracts and really jump in at the deep end, but don't, you know, often run out of steam after time. Sometimes these have to be, recognized and adjusted. I think it's also, you know, when Colin's role, for example, in SSE, having somebody with seniority to be able to absolutely drive that forward with you know, absolute knowledge and conviction is really important. Those are some of the principles that I would always look for.
Okay, so we've kind of moved on from the thought that actually sometimes relationships are forced upon you and you have to make the best of what they are. We've discussed that actually sponsorships are part of the media mix, the channel mix, and you need to think about the limitations and the possibilities. But sometimes actually sponsorships actually become the brand. And a great example of that, Susie, is if you think, I guess, the work was done with Compare the Market, and how initially their sponsorships actually evolved into such a point actually that it became the brand focus. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think Compare the Market is a really interesting one. So I actually worked on the deal with the cinema industry with the Meerkat Mondays, the cinema offer. Was it Meerkat Mondays? Have I got that wrong? Meerkat
Wednesdays.
Movies. Sorry, we did talk. Sorry. So I was actually involved in Orange Wednesdays way back. And then we talked about Meerkat Mondays, but it actually became Meerkat Movies. Sorry, that was behind the scenes stuff. But that was really interesting because I don't know how much I can say on this call. But the cinema industry were keen to. It's a good example where there was a brilliant partnership with the cinema industry and Orange with the ticketing. And at the time, that was quite groundbreaking on one of those loyalty propositions. But but it had been going on for quite some time. And I think there are times actually where even long-term partnerships, if you don't keep them fresh and keep doing new things, like any relationship, become stale and sometimes need to rejuvenate. Now, obviously, you can do that with the brand that you're with, if you've got the creativity and the energy and keep going. But sometimes, you do need to look for a new partner. And the reason why Compare the Market and the cinema industry and ticketing worked was originally the cinema industry actually questioned an insurance company and the movies and entertainment. Does that feel the right fit? Coming back to unusual collaborations. And the reason it was the right fit was because the objectives for both partners aligned. The cinema industry was at a point in time where it needed to promote cinema. I mean, I think cinema's had a real comeback. I'm not working in the industry now, but a few years ago, everything was online and people were not, it wasn't bums on seats. And Compare the Market, a bit like O2, had really got to really good awareness, but really needed to drive loyalty. And their toys were the biggest thing that drove their loyalty. But, the toys had a certain amount of time. So they were looking for something new to give back to their customers. And the two things came together, with the cinema industry wanting real promotion and Compare the Market, because again, they were in a sort of utility industry. Everyone, a massive sameness. How can they differentiate? This is a proposition to give something back to our customers, to really differentiate. And actually, we are going to spend all our money on marketing it. This is going to be our focus. So Compare the Market came on at that time, put all their money from giving away the Meerkat toys to promoting the cinema tickets for their customers, which is great value to customers. And the cinema industry got great promotion throughout the year for the cinema. So it was one of those partnerships that actually, because the two partners had their own objectives aligned in the end proposition, was brilliant. And it was interesting because probably commercially, I'm not sure if actually sort of money paid, I don't know the details. It wasn't done on a sort of pure commercial basis. It was done on what the other partner can give. And so when it comes back to ROI isn't always just about the numbers. It's about what you can bring that's going to deliver on your business and brand strategy and what you need. And sometimes that's beyond just the transactional numbers, and you do have to look beyond that. And Compare the Market have obviously gone on beyond movies to offering, the dinners and all the other things they give. And it's been a really rich strategy for them. So sometimes partnerships take you up on directions where you don't know where they're going to be at the start, but that's where I think you have to be bold and open-minded and go with things, and they can be very fruitful and surprise you.
Thank you. I think that's a really good case in point where it's grown legs and arms, literally, and how Compare the Market then became known as Meerkat as a business, really, and it's synonymous with that, and through its relationships, initially, as you say, with cinemas, but then more latterly with Cafe Nero, has been quite an exciting departure. Okay, so in the spirit of wanting to get some questions going, if anybody on today's call has any questions of the panel, please do take the opportunity to drop something into the chat box, and equally what we'll do is we'll come to you and you'll get the opportunity to ask the team direct. It may well be you're looking at a particular opportunity at the moment, or you've been burnt by previous experiences in this space. Either way, we'd like to take this opportunity to kind of help. You don't have to name names if you don't want to, but if you've got a question of the panel, please do so. In the meantime, let me talk a little bit about social impact and the importance, obviously, community engagement, and obviously the role that both partnerships and sponsorships can have in this space. One for you, Sally. I mean, what role do you think sponsorships and partnerships can have in purpose-driven marketing? How does one go about that? And how do you ensure, obviously, alignment in terms of not just brand and audience, but actually also in values?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, actually. I mean, I think, and Colin would, I think, agree with me on this, that there's all the excitement of major partnerships and sport and activity and the rest of it, but the social impact of that can also be something that we can really come to life through partnerships in my world, in our world, sorry. And thinking about how how to bring that to life, how you bring that community focus really to the forefront, I think is really important. It's great to have bells and whistles, major events, you know, and the rest of it. But going right back down to the social impact of some of these things, I think can also be something that we miss in partnerships. And actually, it can really help. It can really add value to that brand proposition in a very tactical and very personal way, I would say.
Yeah.
Colin?
And I don't know.
I think
Have you worked with any? Sorry, go on, Colin, please.
Sorry, no, that was just Sally. I would add to that is one of the things we talk about is making memories for life.
Yeah.
You know, again, there's that moment, you know, where that could be anything from somebody at a festival that saw the band for the first time, or through to a player escort that got to walk out on a pitch. And sometimes they're number page 42 on a contract, and somebody's sitting going, that is memories for life for young people. It could be somebody that's having a hard time and suddenly they go and they enjoy music and that gives them escapism. That's the bit that really makes a difference. These are real life audience and real life people, and your brand helps make memories for life. And really, a lot of brands can't do that through their, you know, if I'm drinking a product day in, day out, or I'm buying my energy, or I'm going to watch it, you know, buying my car insurance, you're not making a difference to their life. It's you're just a transaction. You have an opportunity with partnerships, individuals and events, etc., that sport, music, etc., to really make memories for life for people. And that's sometimes overlooked. Is emphasize that, make the most of it. You could be making a real difference.
And what I also like, Colin, and when we've spoken about this in the past, is also from some major events and, you know, spectaculars to the community opportunity. You know, I'm thinking, for example, of Aldi and its partnership with the BOA and the BPA, and how they make that come to life in every one of their stores across the country, you know. And that's where it becomes not only just a customer facing initiative, but it's also a staff related opportunity too, for enabling the recognition of their staff through those kind of programs. And I think Aldi have done a really good job on that, because they've committed, they've stuck to it, they've evolved it. And you know, they've got the spikes of the major events in between. They are always omnipresent with their partnerships, and I think that's something that sometimes we forget. We can be more tactical than strategic sometimes, I think.
We had a proposition come across our desk yesterday. David will share it with the four of you after this call, and inevitably it's a late into market, last minute opportunity to kind of get behind a motorsport opportunity, and it's a relatively low involvement. It seems very typical that a lot of brands will get approached by brands looking to sell stuff and selling it on the media value alone, in part because it's so late in the day. There's very little opportunity to activate beyond maybe a few tickets to go to the event. What's your general advice to brands in that situation? Avoid it at all cost, or can it actually be quite a low-cost way to actually get exposure? Again, anyone?
I would do it, just make sure, back to your, check it against your criteria. Does it fit? It could fit. It could actually fit a business objective that is just timing. It could be short-term objective that says this can actually deliver for me. Sometimes partnerships can do that rather than, you know, a general wider marketing initiative. So if it fits, it's the same criteria. That, you know, it could be a great deal. It could be the fact that it's a one-off hit. It could be something that actually is better than just buying slots on digital. But ultimately go back to, why am I doing this? And again, understanding why you're doing it. And then if it adds up, and back to the point that Evie made, is this the proper investment for my company, rather than, oh, that looks like a good deal? And if it fits, why not? Because sometimes you're going to get better value. But the worst thing is getting attracted by the deal. Because if you get attracted to the deal, the other thing is also allow for, back to a point that was made by everybody earlier on, is, have you got the resource to activate it? Have you got the opportunity to make the most of it? Because sometimes that is timing related. But it doesn't mean say don't look at it, but look at it through kind of a clear vision of why you do it, and then stick to the reason. Does it add up then? Would be my advice.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, one of my takeouts from today's conversation has been actually in the absence of having a strategy, you're always going to be open to poor interpretation by other individuals within the organization. So having that clarity and ahead of time and making sure everyone in the business actually knows the brand fit, what the criteria are, what the objectives are, how sponsorship, partnerships, both strategic and short term, can help the brand, puts you in a much stronger position as a marketeer, because there is nothing worse, as I said earlier on, than being given sort of, here's an opportunity for you, brackets, we've already done the deal. Okay, but listen, we haven't really sort of touched upon how the evolving world of digital is actually beginning to impact on these sorts of opportunities. Obviously, it gives you a lot more opportunities in terms of exploiting and finding ways to be able to communicate to discrete audiences digital, but equally too, on the flip side of that, and Evie, I'm going to come to you, it is also potentially more problematic, because people are going to be a lot more vocal about things when they don't understand the fit or have an issue with that particular brand. It may well be that you discover that some of the kind of aspects of brand behavior and what's going on in other markets affect how people see you as a brand and your relationship with that organization. So how do you help brands evolve their thinking in a kind of digital way, particularly when it comes to social, and how you manage that?
No. I mean, it goes back, and sorry to, it sounds almost boring and quite obvious. It's again about what are you trying to achieve, and particularly which social demographic group are you trying to achieve. What I come across quite often is that they throw everybody in the same bucket, whereas you need to segment your marketing strategy towards your main target audiences, because I mean, we have digital natives now. They engage differently, and their time shared on different communication channels is different from a baby boomer or a Gen X or a millennial. So that's already, so everybody engages across these different communication channels, but the focus is different. Plus, we obviously have the phenomenon, and this is something I've learned through my lecturing, is that the younger audience, particularly Gen Alpha and Gen Z, are very good at doing three things at the same time. They are actually communicating through 3 or 4 different channels all at the same time, and they're very good at juggling and keeping those balls up in the air. So again, it's not about digital strategy versus non-digital strategy. It's again, which target audience are you trying to reach? Where is the emphasis? Where is your sweet spot? And then direct your strategy and your dollar towards that. And again, maybe if you're doing an omni-channel, you need a bigger pot of resources and versus your capabilities, versus are you doing something that is very, very focused, like you're just trying to reach, I don't know, Gen Alpha, very short term through TikTok. That is different than a long-term sponsorship where, for example, I do a lot of work in football and in Formula One, where you have a very, very wide target audience. I mean, Formula One football is engaged around the world. An 85-year-old enjoys it versus, also a 15-year-old. You need to have a strategy that then addresses those individual needs. And when it comes back to digital marketing, they will engage differently with digital marketing across those generations, but also geographics. It sounds very, very obvious, but I find it amazing how very often in the strategy plan or the marketing plan, this is not addressed. And they think one strategy addresses all of these generations, all of these geographies and all of these age groups, where it just doesn't anymore. Where maybe 20 years ago it would have, it doesn't anymore. So you also internally need to be honest that you can't be everything to everybody with one partnership.
Yeah.
So you need to have a sweet spot and a focus. Yeah.
That's sound advice. But I think what it also talks to the fact is that you have control of the message, you don't have control as to how it's received. And the reality is, within the world of social, within all the various platforms, particularly obviously the most popular ones, you are going to get feedback, good and bad. And people will actually want to have a point of view, particularly fans, because we know they're passionate. And for that reason, again, when you are selling in a proposition internally with an organization, the PR, the comms team, the corporate affairs team, all of the kind of external embodiment of the brand it's absolutely essential that they're on board, because they're going to be the beneficiaries of the feedback that you'll be given, left, right, and centre as you develop the relationship. We've got a question here from Dave Plunkett, who's on the move. I saw you walking through a street somewhere, Dave. He said, "Great conversation, made more enjoyable, making my journey even more enjoyable. What does the panel think is the core differences between a B2B2C partnership and a B2B2B partnership?" So when you're talking obviously to other brands, be it brand to brand rather than B to consumer, are there differences, or do you think the approach is broadly the same? Again, anyone?
I'll pipe in first. I think the approach is the same, because whether it's a business to business objective or a business to consumer objective, it's back to what do you want to get out of it, and what's your end audience, and how you stay relevant to them. And it's back to understanding why you're doing it. So if that's we want to engage businesses, SMEs, or I want to influence people, it's understanding who your end audience is, and then coming up with the right creative activations to make sure it's relevant to them and it does the job it's meant to do. And that really it doesn't matter what the end audience is, as long as you know what you're trying to do and to who, then you come up with the answers of how you make that engaging and you make it relevant. So people talk about B2B and B2C. I talk about audience, who you're trying to reach and how you're trying to influence them. And that can be a small business, big business, or it can be me as an individual consumer. It's the same idea. You know, what's the output? What do you want to happen?
Sorry, Colin, I cut in.
That's okay.
I was just going to say, I 100% agree. And when I was at Sage, I think it's a very good example, because Sage was very, Sage went through a big repositioning and didn't have any sponsorship or partnerships. So it was created from scratch. And at the start of the Sage journey, it was very much thinking business to business. It was a product-led organization. In the UK, seen as very old-fashioned, not particularly innovative. And where it wanted to go, and also where it is in the US, which is very different. I think it's interesting when you have global brands and partnerships which have got different objectives, actually in different regions, which is a whole other conversation. But the one thing that Sage truly believed in was, business people if anyone in business is human too. It's not B2B, B2C, human to human. To your point, Colin, audiences, you're ultimately appealing to a human at the end of it. Whatever partnership or sponsorship we're doing, there's a human decision maker, whether they're whatever, if it's consumer or business, fundamentally they're a human being. And I think the Sage strategy was interesting because it very much had a sports strategy, but it was very much, it needs to do two things. It needs to be very human. It was supporting its business customers. So Sage now does partnerships throughout the year, the 100 cricket, Six Nations and Autumn Nations rugby, and MLB, Major League Baseball in the States, to cover their regions, to cover the year, and to cover also men, women, and grassroots. So it's quite extensive, and it wasn't a massive budget. So I think they've done it quite cleverly. But on one side, they're doing things like it's about the tech and sponsoring a smart ball in rugby, because this is the brand repositioning and being, forward thinking in tech and innovation and AI and insights. And on the other hand, it's being really human and supporting their business customers. So doing a deal with, so Pieminster is a Sage customer. Sage always try and get their customers on board and integrate them into partnerships to genuinely support their customers and give value. So Pieminster is a customer, and they're giving out pies for, little pop-ups and activations and a very small human level, but a small partnership in a big partnership, which shows that human level of supporting customers and then giving lovely Pieminster pies to other customers that predict the game, and there's an insight level. So it all comes back to the human connection, I think, and what people need, and understanding what your objectives are for your customers, whatever walk of life or whatever status they're at.
Yeah, and it also comes back to add to that. What are both parties looking for? So I think a very big difference in the B2B sector is, and particularly if you're going into long-term sponsorships or sports marketing, is first of all, it's not always necessarily then a fee stroke retainer. It can also be value in kind. So actually your expertise, your core business then actually becomes the payment for the agreement, or the part payment for the agreement. And that is then an exchange of capabilities. It's not necessarily the dollar. It's also, I need your technology. And by working together, that technology then evolves, and that starts building. So to the brand owner, that starts building the brand and giving them leverage and market position. Whereas to the receiver, that then gives them access to innovation, to technology, et cetera, and particularly with technology brands, or even betting brands, that adds a value over and above just the exchange of dollars and retainer fees. So I think that's the big difference between a B2B and a B2C led sponsorship, particularly when it's long term. It's an exchange of knowledge and building that knowledge on what both parties bring, versus just an exchange of, well, you've got so many LED boards, minutes, and blah blah blah. Now give me the dollars and off we go. So also the rights that you get, and what you pay for and how you pay for that, whether it's value in kind or through cash, is a very big difference, whether it's B2B and B2C. The other thing that a lot of partners forget when they start talking to each other, and particularly when they are very big organizations, is the B2E. They talk about B2B customers, they talk about B2C customers, but they actually forget one of their most valuable stakeholders is their own employees. And particularly if you have an employee base of thousands and thousands, pull them into that space.
Yeah, that's absolutely. I mean, and larger corporates basically will value a lot of these sponsorships in a very different way. And actually, from the employee point of view, that sense of collaboration, that sense of community can be really powerful. Listen, I'm sadly going to have to end our conversation there. It's been a really fascinating dip into the world of sponsorship. One of the things that actually has highlighted for me today is the complexity of it all, and it's ever changing, and both in terms of the nature of sponsorships, the brands that one can actually work with. And for that reason, I think it's quite difficult to be objective. You know, if you're working in an organization, particularly if you are a CMO or a head of marketing, this is a highly specialist area in the same way as media planning and buying is. So if you would like some help, obviously you know where to come to. Please do drop me a line at Pimento, and I'll introduce you to Sally, Evie, Colin, and Susie, who can all perhaps give you some support and help in your selection and management, and most importantly, execution of your our activation of your sponsorships. Our next session that's coming up, I think in a couple of months' time, we'll be looking at actually the whole area of ECG, and looking in particular at green growth and how marketing and ESG rather is shaping the future of business. Particularly topical at the moment, and obviously with all the changes happening across the pond. So Wednesday the 30th of April at 11 a.m, please put that in your diary. We will send out details nearer the time. But again, we will have a broad range of experts from the world of marketing to give you some insights as to what you as an organization can be doing to improve your ESG credentials. So that's, apart from very thanking the panel, Sally, Evie, and Colin. Thank you very much. Thank all of you attending today. I hope you've enjoyed the session, and look forward to having your feedback in due course, and wish you all the best for the rest of the day. Thank you.